joined at a time when a few different people, a couple of Italians and an English guy joined, and the English guy and I are both quite relatively young. So I'm 38 now, so I must have been about 34 then. And at the time I was like a rabbit in car headlights, had no expectation of what I was doing or what it was all about. And went to the first meeting, which was really, really impressive, and it sort of started to network me into a different aspect of Lourdes, and I think that's where diocesan Lourdes is different, hospitality Lourdes is different, and so this was another different thing again. But that's where my relationship with hospitality started, because I felt that if I'd be given this privilege and responsibility from the sanctuary, that I should probably also be giving something back to the sanctuary. So following on from my dad's experience as a stagiaire, who was probably a year or so ahead of me, I started to volunteer. So I've steps and stairs, again, like the youth team, year on, year off. I've done some stages and actually just finished one in Easter week there. And in the busyness of everything, I didn't fully realise that it was actually, I did know it was my fourth, but I didn't realise the significance of that. So I've done the kind of initial paperwork now for engagement next year, all being well. And it was something that actually kind of really struck me that I didn't think it would, you know, where I was having a meeting with Paul Whitburn, and he was kind of going through the stuff, and Bernard Glenholm as well. And I think in the context of all the things that we do in Lourdes, it was something that actually felt very important and very significant, and moving in a way as well, because I kind of I feel like the Hospitality Notre Dame de Lourdes is a really special organisation in the sense that it's very international, but it's also a network within countries as well. So hopefully this time next year I'll be properly part of your network, as opposed to as a stagiaire in training. So those are my various kind of Lourdes links, but this case that I'm going to talk about is really the first miracle that I've voted on. So the first couple of years of International Medical Committee meetings were very kind of observational, really, because when you think of the length of time that it takes to work up a cure, there's conversations about, oh, well, we all know Mrs. Racco, for example, who's one of the ones that's still ongoing. We discussed her last year. Just to update you, the MRI scan was normal, the blah blah blah, and you're kind of sitting going, I don't really know who this is, I don't really know the full details. But when there's a case where you vote, everything is kind of looked at again from start to finish, and so this is the first one where I kind of got to see the depth of materials that exist for these cases, and also the length of time that the investigation takes. So it was a special time, and again, in the midst of all the busyness, it just sort of almost passes you by. But I remember thinking, with this case, this is not my area of expertise. Some of the talk about the case since then has been to say that it was back pain or it was sciatica, which, you know, many people may have had. I've certainly had sciatica and it's really painful, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's something that you wouldn't necessarily need to be cured of in Lourdes, given the sickness and disease and all the terrible things that people have in terms of physical or mental disabilities when they're there. But this isn't a case of back pain or sciatica, as I subsequently found out. And there's very physical findings that actually were present and then absent, and that's where the medical evidence is really key. So the cases of Sr Bernadette Moriau, who is a nun based in Beauvais, in the Diocese of Oise, in the north of France, and this is declared as the 70th Miracle of Lourdes, and it was declared on the 11th of February. So the week that ran up to that was, I was busy with work and got an email from Dr. De Francis to say, can I send you a document and can you get it back to me within 30 minutes? And of course you're like, well, this is a bit strange, but I said, yeah, of course. It didn't have 30 minutes at all, but I stopped what I was doing. I kind of got the impression it was something obviously important, and it was the press release for this in advance, and it was embargoed at that point. So I was then in Lourdes and couldn't tell anybody I was with that, you know, people were saying we're going to go to Grotto Mass, and I was like, no, you should go to the International Mass. And they were like, no, I don't like the International Mass, it's too long, we'll go to the Grotto Mass. I was like, no, maybe this year is your year, you should go to the International Mass, because I knew that during the International Mass this was going to be announced. So my job was just to check the English translation of the press release. So it was announced, and it's been, I think, very well received across the world. And I'll talk to you about some of the details of the case. So this is actually from the press conference. So the way that the day played out was that it was announced at the end of the international mass, and then subsequently at 6 o'clock there was a press conference in the medical bureau. So it was Dr. de Francis and Bishop Rouvet, basically with lots of French media initially, which has just carried on, and it started to then filter into like Reuters, and it's been on Daily Mail, and actually it sort of shows you that the spirit of Lourdes and the interest in Lourdes is still very much alive, which is encouraging from our point of view. But it was just a really nice time to be there and to witness that. And I recorded this on video on the Service page, which I'll show you. So if you want to look through the Facebook post, you can watch the whole declaration of this from the medical point of view at the time. So, Sr Bernadette Moriau. So the one thing you don't get with these cures is the details. So these are the details, and up until a certain point they are usually private and embargoed. But once it's press released, the person who's concerned has obviously agreed to the fact that there's going to be sort of international scrutiny on their medical case. But these are details which pertain to this case. So she was born in 1939 and was named after St Bernadette of Lourdes. So there's already from birth a connection with the sanctuary, but was in northern France obviously. She was the second of 7 children, but her life, I mean not just her childhood, but her life was fairly difficult. So her brother, who was 3 years younger than her, died when he was 5 months old. Another brother died of lung cancer. A sister died of connective tissue disease, and another sister, after several suicide attempts, actually committed suicide. So a difficult enough life in adulthood. At the age of 19, she entered a Franciscan convent in Beauvais, where obviously she spent the rest of her life. And this is in the Diocese of Oise. So the Diocese of Oise is critical because that's where the miracle is declared, not in Lourdes itself. So she became a nursing assistant and then subsequently a nurse in 1965. So again, almost mirroring the St Bernadette story of when she went to Nevers and becoming involved in sort of service of the sick, and also feeding into the kind of the relationship with the sick and carers of the sick that exists in Lourdes. So the way that her case developed as a young person, so she's just become a nurse, she's 26, and she developed left-sided lumbosacral pain, so this left-sided lower back pain essentially. And at that point it was diagnosed that she had a narrowing of her spinal canal, which was giving her the pain, and that's why this happened. In 1968 she had the first of many surgeries. This is a condensed version obviously of a long period of time, but she had spinal surgery to try and correct this, but without any real significant resolution. Unrelated but an important medical event, she had pleurisy caused by a tuberculous lung infection. And then from 1987, so if we really fast forward 20 years, she started to get leg symptoms. So it became from isolated back problem to become a leg problem as well. And at that point, she couldn't live without morphine. So she basically became really dependent, not in a drug dependence way, but from a pain management way, dependent on morphine. But even with the morphine, she wasn't able to manage her pain control well. Another surgical intervention that she has was to have an intracanal nerve stimulator to try and tackle the pain, so she had that surgically implanted, and again gave some relief, but after a certain amount of time the benefit of that stopped for her, and so she was still very much left very in pain and disabled. And then in 1995 she developed urinary incontinence, so you can see this progressive kind of pretty difficult, from pain to a neurological condition, which is now impacting on her life in many different ways. So lots of tests exist to say that she had a neurogenic bladder, whereby she didn't know when she needed to go to the toilet, and therefore she would have to self-catheterize. And to control her pain, then to limit movement, she started to wear a rigid body brace around her torso. In 2001, the neurogenic bladder documentation is there from the tests that were done. She was self-catheterizing at this point. And in 2005 she had further spinal infiltrations. Then in 2007 she developed bowel incontinence as well. So even from the pain point of view, if that was under control, she's now doubly incontinent, so quite severely incapacitated. And the other symptoms that were kind of in the background of this were that the pain was worsening, it wasn't controlled by morphine or the braces. Her left leg had foot drop in it, so she had to wear foot orthosis, and she had very limited mobility. And the key thing from the medical point of view is, from the Lourdes point of view, is that there was no likelihood of that resolving spontaneously. One of the topics of discussion that went back and forward like a tennis ball was the left lower limb foot drop, because there were two letters in her medical records that conflicted with each other in terms of the evidence. So that was one where people were saying this is not consistent with pathology, or this consultant in 1984 said this and this one in 1989 said that, and they're directly opposite. And it goes to the point where sometimes you can write left when you mean right, which maybe horrifies people when you think of that in healthcare, but you can sometimes do it, as long as you don't take out the wrong kidney or something. You just usually have that impact. But basically, it was one of those things where reflexes up or down, and they're the opposite of each other. So that was one where people had an issue, because it was felt, well, the leg symptoms don't necessarily correlate with the illness. But then if you take a big step back, you think, but the illness was definitely there. So it doesn't, it's not to say that that thing is what the whole case rests on, but these are the sorts of discussions that go back and forward, because you don't always have an entirely clear-cut case. And for me, the pain symptomatology, it's difficult to say pain there, pain not there, because there's no blood test that says you're in pain. You're either in pain or you're not, and then that depends on the patient truthfully telling us that they're in pain. And the other thing that people go through, if they go through this process, is lots of psychological tests. So it's almost like you start from the position of, we don't believe you, and work backwards. So it's quite a difficult thing for someone to go through. So, if you did have a miraculous Lourdes, you can see why people might just want to go off quietly home, thank God, praise God, tell people maybe in their inner circle, but not want to go through this level of scrutiny. But this was, I think you'll agree, quite a significant illness. So she then went to Lourdes in 2008, and she was in 2008 in the first week of July, so that was the last Jubilee year. Think about it, the 150-year anniversary of the apparitions, and went through the normal pilgrimage. And it was suggested that she go to Lourdes by her own GP, or the equivalent in France, her family physician, who was also a doctor on her pilgrimage. So there was a direct link between her normal medical doctor and the fact that he was actually there. So that's an unusual enough situation. But anyway, she went through the pilgrimage as normal, went through all the things that you normally do as part of a pilgrimage, and then travelled back home again to Beauvais with nothing out of the ordinary, I suppose. When she got back to Beauvais, she reported that she felt exhausted. She actually felt physically worse than she had when she went to Lourdes, which I think is something you can relate to, in the sense that you're burning the candle at both ends, and maybe you're sleeping in a strange environment, you've had to travel over land to get there. So certainly there was nothing in her mind at that point where she felt that she had experienced anything miraculous at the sanctuary. But it was 3 days later, on the 11th of February, and this sticks in my head because the Down and Connor pilgrimage always lands on the 11th of February, so in 2008 we were there. July, what did I say?
February.
Sorry, 11th of July. There's a quality control panel here. 11th of July, you're very right. So on the 11th of July, she was back in her convent in Beauvais, praying in the chapel to the Blessed Sacrament, and she felt that she was in communion with the Blessed Sacrament procession in the sanctuary, and she was praying that as well. So it wasn't it wasn't that she felt that message came to her. She was praying so that she would be in communion with the Blessed Sacrament procession in Lourdes. And at that time, she said she felt a sudden sense of relaxation come across her body, and she heard a voice telling her that she didn't need her brace and her foot brace anymore, and she should take them off. So she just prayed, and then quietly just got herself up, went up to her bedroom in the convent and took these off, and hasn't needed them since. And so the morphine has not been used since either. There was also, interestingly, no morphine withdrawal symptoms. She was able to stop everything just immediately, and essentially live a normal and full life. So she went back to then, once she was physically better, back to caring for the sick again. So not necessarily as a full-time nurse, I'm not sure that she did that, but certainly she immediately, as she was physically well, started to help other people, which again is somebody similar to your experience, Deirdre, in terms of your resolution that after severe illness that you would be back on your feet and helping others. So she essentially hasn't looked back from these events and is cured. So what would happen from that point on, she had to report that to the sanctuary, and I think that happened a year later in 2009, and usually it's when the pilgrimage goes back again that the proper paperwork starts, which is a bit of an issue for the Bureau because ideally you want it then and there. But the good thing was that her doctor was linked to her and the pilgrimage, and therefore there was good communication, and she complied also with all of the back and forward that went on between the sanctuary and her home. And essentially, battery of tests, several meetings of the Medical Bureau of Lourdes. So the difference between that and the International Medical Committee of Lourdes is that when she would come to the sanctuary, and this is similar, there's people doing this at the minute, when they come to the sanctuary, all the doctors and nurses who are physically present are called, and healthcare professionals are called to a meeting whereby all the evidence is reviewed, and they have a discussion at that time that's then documented. And essentially that serves as a document that then is reviewed by the International Medical Committee, so we can look at the one from 2013 and the one from 2009, and basically you start to build that story, and it's almost like a kind of a multidisciplinary team case meeting. So she went through all of those steps, and it was in 2016, so 8 years after the cure, that we voted, and the vote was a basket, and everyone had a oui and a no page, and you basically put it in, and we all voted, and then the bishop voted as well, and then the bishop said, oh, I don't think I can vote, I'm not a doctor, so the basket had to go back to the start. Everyone got their wees and their no's again, and then we did another circuit without the bishop, and it was, I think there were maybe 30 people present. There was one person said no, and everyone else said oui, and it needs a 2/3 majority to carry, so that obviously carried. So from 2016 we were then, great, 70th Miracle of Lourdes, and it was tumbleweed, nothing happened. And that goes to the point that the International Medical Committee doesn't declare miracles. The International Medical Committee defines that there is no explanation for what happened medically. And it goes back to the Diocese of Oise. Now the Bishop of the Diocese of Oise decided that he wanted some more information, so he's, I think, convened a smaller local group of doctors to look at everything again from start to finish. And also then, I think, he then fed back maybe late in 2017 to the sanctuary. But this was after we met in November, so it definitely wasn't in time for the International Medical Committee meeting, because we asked what was happening with the case, and we were told we don't know, it's with the Bishop, it hasn't come back to us yet. But obviously it came back sometime before the 11th of February, and I think it was then decided by the sanctuary that it would be press released on the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, as opposed to just on whatever day that communication came back in, and it was in conjunction with the diocese, so there was a press conference in Beauvais and a press conference in Lourdes, and it has stimulated a lot of interest, nationally and internationally. And I didn't proactively chase this at all, but they contacted me, they had my details from before, but they said, oh, there's been a 70th Miracle there, can you come and talk about it? But the key point, I think, is that it was actually a really positive experience from the point of view of national media in Ireland, where we're sort of facing the vote on repealing the 8th Amendment, and I felt that Moran and Dahi were really positive. If you haven't seen it, they're really nice, they're really inquisitive, there was no sort of challenge, and often sometimes if there's media stuff, if you say God exists, then they have to find someone who said God doesn't exist, and you end up trying to deliver some sort of coherent message whilst fighting off all the kind of negativity. And it's not to say that other opinions aren't valid, but this was a really nice way, and it actually showed that there's national interest, and the video clip of this has now had over 50,000 views, so that shows that Ireland does have an interest in Lourdes. I think Ireland's still very much a place where faith is alive, and you can see the communities all starting to build, and with social media I think that's really easy to see. So that's the story of the 70th miracle.